Hi everyone, welcome to the first episode of What the Observer Sees. My name is Bob and I'm here with my co-host
Arun.
and we are here today with Sashe as our guest. So
Hi,
Sashe,
everyone.
how are you?
Good. I'm great. Thanks for inviting me.
Yep. So just tell us a little bit about yourself, Sashe.
Okay, I guess a little bit about my background. I'm, obviously the CTO of Leaderonomics, and at Leaderonomics we do a lot of human capital development, all the way from assessments, training development, coaching.
Right.
I particularly held a portfolio about digital solutions for the HR space. Myself personally, IT guy, tech guy, so I'm known, but that's a bit about me.
So we heard about you had an interesting background leading all the way up to Leaderonomics.
Yes.
So would you mind telling us a little bit about how and your journey ending up here?
So I'm an engineer by training, and then I did R&D engineering. Then when I moved back to Malaysia, I couldn't find jobs in the area that I was looking for, so I kind of reinvented myself as an IT guy, and then had a pretty long IT career. I'm very happy to say that my IT career was across different industries, right? So it was financial, it was manufacturing, it was supply chain. So that gave me a lot of exposure, and that built my passion to people development. Because as I saw different industries, different companies, I realized that the key, goal, the key success factor was people development. So then I moved to the HR field in the last 6-7 years.
Right. And so, that kind of explains why you are in Leaderonomics.
Yes, that's right.
But was there something else besides that kind of made you want to make that big shift out of that corporate setting and into more of a L&D business?
Not to move out of corporate setting to L&D business, but more of like when I was working in high-tech fields, I felt that people kind of lost the theme. They lost the story in the sense that everything was tech. And people were doing things because it was the latest tech, the best tech,
Sure.
Without understanding that tech is an enabler to help solve real-life problems, and that people are an equally important part in that solving of problems. And so the focus became very tech and not about solving problems and not about people. And so I kind of wanted to step away from that, and I think that's when I moved into L&D and HR.
Okay, very interesting. Yeah. So I think in today's episode, we're really going to be talking about game-based learning versus gamification and how it impacts corporate learning specifically. So from your own definition, maybe you can give us your thoughts about the two and where you think they might be different or similar in some ways.
Right. Well, obviously the root word of this is game, right? And so games, by definition, are things that have rules that you play for fun and you try to, there's an objective to win something, right? So then you go to the word gamification, and what that means is, there's a long history of games, right? And so games were refined over time to have these elements that are addictive,
right,
and competitive, that makes people come back again and again and again.
Yeah.
So they've kind of, fine-tuned these mechanisms on how games are supposed to be. So then you kind of use the word gamification because then what it does is use game-based mechanics, right, in non-game situations. Right? So things that work in a game, and you use it in a non-game situation.
Yeah.
And so that's where gamification comes in. And then game-based learning is basically applying gamification to achieve a learning outcome.
Right.
And then so that's how I define it.
Okay.
Is that what you guys define it as well?
Yeah, I think so. Definitely, I think, when, being in that gamification space, we obviously focus a lot of our attention on game-based learning.
Correct.
Right? So that was the primary objective. How do we use game-based elements to teach a certain skill set?
Correct.
Right? In our context, it's mainly on the soft skill development side. Right? But I think gamification has that added element of driving engagement.
Yes.
And obviously people learn better when they are engaged and when attention is high. So that element of gamification is very vital in the process so that people can stay engaged, they can understand the content, and they can retain it better. And over time, hopefully that drives a better learning outcome for the participant, right? Yeah. So that's the way we look at it today. Bob, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I like that segment where you said, it drives an aspect of like competitiveness, where they want to come back and they want to continuously engage and be a part of the system, a part of that learning and whatnot.
Yeah.
That's in essence gamification.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Yeah, and game-based learning is basically implementing learning,
Yeah.
right, in the form of games, like
Correct.
concealing the learning
Yeah, correct.
in games, right? So I'm actually quite curious, just to jog back down memory lane, right? So if you have to recall back your experiences in in the multiple fields that you have, right?
Sure.
How would gamification impact the industries that you were in previously?
Well, I mean, like the most simplest thing that you'll see in every industry is KPIs, right? At the very core, you look at KPIs, right? What are KPIs? They're goals, right? And they make these goals visible, and you have to kind of like strive towards them. And then when you get progressively closer, you celebrate those wins. Actually, those are game-based elements, right?
Yeah,
Right.
for sure.
Just like in a game, when you play, you know what the end goal is, and you kind of track your progress towards it.
Right.
So even that can be considered game-based learning, right? And then of things that we do, like for example, when you do learning, you have leaderboards as to like how many people completed how many hours. That's also a game-based element. So there's lots of little game-based elements that you see from all industries that are used because we know that it works. Even things like doing things as a group versus doing it individually. That is a game-based element, right? Social nature of games is
Right,
better than
definitely.
solo games.
Yep.
So yeah, I think to your point, every industry has incorporated some basis of it because it's really based in science. It's psychology, right? Games have refined it where they've used human psychology to make things addictive, for you to keep coming back, for you to keep going until you finish it. So this applies to anything you do in life, really.
Okay.
Yeah, like keeping the engagement, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, one of the big things that, we've been very interested is in gamification for the engagement space.
Nice.
Right.
Okay.
So I know that you definitely are part of the Leaderonomics digital team.
Yes.
And one of your core solutions is called Budaya, powered by Happily. And that's a fantastic app for engagement, and it's driven on that basic core model of gamification.
Right.
So maybe you can explain a little bit more about Budaya and how the app uses gamification to drive employee engagement.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for giving me some airtime to pitch some
Definitely.
products as well. But no, I think let's. I just want to give the context a little bit. So Budaya is built to make sure that you have a way to get deep employee insights in order to create deep employee engagement. Right. That was kind of the basis of that solution.
Yep.
Now, the most common way companies do this is by running an annual employee engagement survey.
Right.
Right, which is inherently flawed because it's not real time, it's once in a while. It's biased because depending on how that week went, that you're answering the question,
Right.
Yeah.
it's recency biased, right? You're going to answer based on
Correct,
what
yep.
you just remembered, not the whole year, right? And then there's a lot of work around it and things like that. So just inherently flawed. It's a bad idea.
Yep.
Now, the
Right.
solution to that, everybody knows, is daily micropulse surveys, right? Which means, can I survey somebody in a short bit every day?
Right.
In order to get the true and real-time insights of your employees.
Yeah.
Now, the problem is, how are you going to make somebody do something every day,
Right.
right?
Right.
Yeah.
That's really hard. So
Yeah.
I know the problem, I know the solution, but now it's really hard.
Yeah.
So that's when I think gamification plays a big role, right? So in our app, which is Happily, and then Budaya is kind of the consulting and the services. So the app incorporates lots of gamification elements, right? So first of all, rewarding people with coins.
Right.
After you complete your survey, you get to see a wall of your peers,
Yeah.
of what's happening around the company. So there's that, oh, I'm curious, right? Everything that you do on the app gives you a value score. There's this,
Right.
Progress bar that tells you, how much more you have and how much you've gotten. Even things like, we just added a new feature where as soon as you finish your micropulse survey daily, which takes like a minute, you will see a little hand that says, who around you has also done it?
Okay.
So that's a gamification element.
That's a social kind of
social thing, right? Because I'm not doing it alone. I say, oh, I did it. Oh my God. Arun did it too. Oh
Yeah.
my God.
Yeah.
Bob did it too.
Yeah.
So I feel like I'm doing it as part of other people. So even these little things are gamification elements that we incorporate into the app to make sure that it's addictive.
Right.
Right. And addiction, we always look at the word addiction as a bad word, right? But addiction is not a bad word if you're using addiction to a good, right?
Yeah, create a
What if you're addicted to exercise? What if you're addicted to learning?
Yeah.
Right. What if you're addicted to, calling your parents every week? That addiction can be a good thing.
Okay. And from experiences with clients, do you see that gamification element coming through, and they kind of understand the impact it has on their employees?
Yeah.
Is it something that is intrinsic in the product itself, or is it something that is built over time and over experience and using the app over months and potentially years?
Yeah. So very, very good question. So in terms of engagement, right, the gamification elements has to be started immediately.
Okay.
Right. Because what happens with human behavior is, if I start something and I'm not hooked, I will never come back.
Yep.
You don't have a second chance.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
So you got to start up and you got to hook them in the first few days. Right. The first week, first month is super critical. Right. So all gamification elements must be incorporated from day one. It's not something that you ramp up, right? And so we do track it. And one of the things that I'm proud of is that, when we talk to clients, other apps versus the ones that we use, we get consistently above, our minimum is 70% engagement on a weekly basis.
Okay.
We consistently get above 80. So 80% of participants will engage weekly, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that it works.
Yeah, I mean, definitely as a user myself, I think it definitely works. If you have a small team versus a big team, I think there is a lot of insight or intelligence you can get over time if people consistently use the app, right? So I think definitely I'm a big proponent of the gamification element of it. I was extremely displeased when I missed one day and
you lost your streak.
and I lost like 300 days streak.
My God.
That's difficult,
So that is the gamification element working.
Yeah, that's
because you want to keep your streak alive, right?
Exactly. That was what I was tracking the most.
Big streak.
And I kind of just like missed one day and it went down to 0. I was like so frustrated about the whole process. Yeah. So, but moving on, I think there are other options as well in that people use, not necessarily in the corporate setting, but in a B2C setting. I think one big example is Class Dojo.
Yeah.
So Bob, maybe you can explain a little bit more about what Class Dojo does. And
all right. So Class Dojo is basically like an e-blackboard system.
Yep.
So where teachers and students can maintain communication with each other. So now that online classes is a huge thing.
Yeah.
Because of the COVID pandemic, and everyone had to make tweaks here and there, especially in the education space.
Yeah.
So it allows students to check in, right, and maintain their attendance for classes. It allows teachers to check in on them to see that so and so is attending class with however many percentage of attendance grade, right? And it allows the teachers to even give them reward. To reward them for the system. The same way, it could be a token-based reward, or the teacher itself, him or herself, could actually go out and could do like a physical reward of some sense. I know that there are teachers who engage in this app.
Yep.
And as a reward, they bought like their students, for example, like food.
Yep.
Like just as a form of reward for checking in. And this Class Dojo is, I may not be too sure on when it actually started out, but I do know that their retention rate is actually quite high, especially in the education space.
Yeah. And I think you'll see it everywhere. I think these kind of game-based elements are used everywhere. They have to be.
Yeah, definitely.
Right, especially in today's world, right, where everybody's very distracted.
Yeah. I mean, there's another great app that I have used in the past called Duolingo.
Yes.
That's a language app, right?
Yeah.
And I think they were one of the first big apps, I think, out there in the language space that really used gamification, right? I think before that, it was very classroom-based.
Correct.
I remember studying German when I was younger. It was, you go to class, you memorize,
take an exam.
You take the exams. So it was kind of a tedious process to learn a new language. You had to put in a lot of effort. Whereas today, I think you're driven by that reward mechanism. You want to level up, right?
Yes.
You want to move to the next level, become an intermediate. And I think that enables people to just spend maybe 5 minutes, 10 minutes every day consistently to learn the language. And I think that's more impactful than going to a class once a week, 1 hour, and hoping to learn in that process, right? So And I agree. I mean, our lives have become a lot more complicated, a lot more fast-paced. It is really difficult for people to commit 1 hour, 2 hours a week to be in a physical classroom versus being 5 minutes, 10 minutes on the app.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. And think about it, right? In your typical phone, if I picked up one of your phones, how many apps do you have on your phone? Probably like 100. and so how are you going to divide your time across all that, right? So the one that has the most addictive nature is going to win. And how do you get addictive? You use game-based elements.
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah, so I think the next part is really about games in the B2C context, like real life games that people play. Because obviously we wanna bring that kind of B2C element to see what else games are there available in the market that incorporate some of this game-based learning. So maybe, Bob, you want to share a couple of examples? I know you're the expert in that space.
Oh, yeah. Bob's the board game guru.
No. I just happen to like games, right? So one game-based learning, and it's B2C games out there. I'm sure that a lot of companies have done this, but we think about coding games.
Coding games.
Yeah, so coding games. So for example, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm not so sure if I remember Microsoft having an app in which they teach you the very basics of coding in the sense of, and they skin it and they put a skin on it in the sense of you're trying to park a car. So the car starts off in a separate lane. So by inputting a series of codes, right, you're actually getting the car to park at a specific location.
Okay,
right?
Fantastic.
So it's a matter of how do they, for students or for the learner's perspective, is I gotta get the car to that space, and then we pass, and then the level gets more and more. It could get more and more sadistic. Like they could put moving traffic. I don't know. Like
so the better
stuff.
you go, the better your car will do.
Yeah, correct. So and then ultimately, for the learners, it gets more and more challenging. Yeah. But ultimately, it teaches the element, the essence of this code represents something. This code represents something.
Yeah.
And another coding game is actually this very, very simple like text-based game. It's called Bit Burner. It's basically set in this cyber setting, where you have your own corporate setting, right? And then you're just trying to fend off like any cyber attacks. So in the form of you're doing this to set up your defense. You're doing this to set up a generator or something like that. So they skin it in the sense of probably trying to ward off any attacks, but in the end you're still learning different kinds of coding systems.
And I think this concept of skinning I think is very important, because I think when we talk about game-based learning, so far we've talked about incentives and rewards and things like that, right? But actually another very important part of game-based learning or gamification is what you call skinning, but I call storytelling.
Yeah.
Right? There has to be an immersive story that I can kind of lose myself in.
Right.
Where I forget that I'm actually doing something because I'm actually immersed in the story. Like I'm actually trying to park the car, but what I'm actually doing is coding.
Yeah.
Right. So that skin is actually, it's got to be a very compelling story, and I think that's a very important element. That
exactly. Yeah. Definitely. No, I mean, I've played similar games in the past as well, and I think that compelling story allows you to stay motivated.
Exactly.
When the core objective is quite dull.
Yeah.
Right. And it might not be your primary objective. Like, you want to learn the skill, but you want to do it in a way that keeps you engaged.
Yeah.
I think that compelling story makes a lot of difference.
Huge difference.
Yeah, huge difference. Right. And I think that if we come back to Duolingo and some of those, I think that's one of the big reasons why I use the app, is because it's kind of interesting to collect that points, get onto the leaderboard. You can compare your scores against other people.
Yeah.
And I think it's that competitive element, right, that really pushes you to use the app.
And specific to Duolingo, they have storytelling too, because
they do.
every module has a story of like, okay, this guy's going to the shop, he's ordering something.
Exactly.
And you like follow that story and you're learning the words, right? And then there's another story,
Okay.
Yeah.
And speaking of like storytelling and great atmosphere, great skinning, right, or elements of immersiveness behind it, are there any Leaderonomics simulations out there that you know of that has that similar elements in terms of getting participants immersed?
We have a ton, right? You can start with our Silega simulations, right? Which is, we have like Cold War, where you're actually putting teams to represent different countries during the Cold War, right? And then and you're trying to get them to forget that they're actually learning something, but they're that they're actually trying to fight each other and survive as a country. But then you get the debriefs later, right? Yeah. Then of course my favorite one is Inside Risk, right? Which is even takes it to another level. If you talk about simulating something, and then there's the next level is getting really immersed, where you really, really get immersed, right?
Yep.
And so Inside Risk, for those who don't know, is a experience. I don't even want to call it a simulation, where you go through a real life case study of a kidnapping, and you get and it's just the production value is so high, and that helps get the immersion, right?
Exactly.
The production value, right?
Yeah.
And then you feel like you're part of the story, and you're taking actions, and then you wind up learning. Like, oh, I learned something. That's great. Yeah.
All about concealing the learning behind all that immersion and whatnot. Right. So we talked about a lot of gamification, talk about the elements, and we did talk about game-based learning as well. Mm-hmm. But how do we draw the difference between these two? I'm sure that everyone outside tends to use the term gamification and game-based learning quite interchangeably.
Yeah.
But where do we draw the line between these two? What are your thoughts?
I have an opinion, and I don't know whether you guys agree or not.
Ahead,
but for me, gamification is the larger parent word, right?
Yeah.
Right.
So for me, you can gamify anything, right? I can gamify health, financial health as well, or physical health. I can also gamify learning. So for me, that gamification is kind of like the broad category, where it kind of covers everything. Yeah. Whereas game-based learning is really using those elements to deliver a learning outcome, where you're trying to change someone's behavior, right? So that's how I kind of simplify things.
No, I would agree as well. I think we tend to focus on the game-based learning element a lot more, but you're definitely right. I think the gamification is that parent or that umbrella under which game-based learning sits.
Correct.
I think sometimes game-based learning in our context can also mean using simulated context to deliver a certain learning outcome.
Yes.
Sometimes people get wrapped up too much into the game that they forget about the learning.
Yeah.
But that's where usually at the end, when you put the context back, they kind of see the connection better, right?
Which is where the facilitator is very important.
Exactly.
To make those connections.
Yeah. So the facilitator becomes a very important part of that process, right? But I think gamification, people don't necessarily equate one to the other. I think they realize that, okay, this is something that incentivizes me. They don't probably know it as the term of gamification. They just think that, okay, this is a very good incentive mechanism, right? But in a way, it's still one and the same thing. It's just that people might have a different word or a phrase for it.
I think just to add on to that, like gamification has a lot of elements, right? And so when people gamify something, it's not necessary that they use all the elements, right?
Yeah.
So for me, I look at gamification as 4 elements. Just the incentives is very important. The storytelling, immersion is very important. The social nature of it's very important.
Yep.
And then the other one is having a little bit of autonomy. Like I can control the outcome. Like I'm not just a passenger participant, right? I need to be able to, as a game, I need to participate to control the outcome, right? So I think these are, for me, 4 broad gamification categories. And you can use 1 or 2. The more you use, the better it is.
Yep.
But then game-based learning is then using actual games as a learning, right? But the games already have gamification mechanics in it.
Yeah, it's already embedded.
Okay, I see your point. Yeah, it sort of echoes what I had in mind as well. Basically, the common factor between gamification and game-based learning is that it promotes the essence of participation, encourages you to go forth and just try, repeat. It keeps you in that game or that act of
that situation,
in the situation, or the act of doing something, right?
Sure.
And I also like the fact that basically the differentiator, and do let me know if you have different thoughts on this. That the differentiator between gamification and game-based learning is the teaching element. So within game-based learning, it's very the focus of it is solely on learning and teaching you in the form of immersion through whichever scenarios that is presented. Whereas gamification really focuses on participation and on encouraging repetition. Yeah. Sure. So that there's not much teaching involved in that. What do you guys think?
Yeah, similar. I think like the gamification is just the elements of that. And yeah, I
Okay.
agree with you. And then the game-based learning has to be focused on learning, right? Obviously, it's in the word. So it has to be focused on that. Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's very, very applicable to today's learning. I think adult learning today is very hard, right? People find it very hard. So I think
Yeah, definitely.
it's definitely relevant more today.
Oh, okay, great. So Sashe, before we wrap things up, you have any last words to the audience, or is there anything that you'd like to say about gamification, game-based learning?
No, I think you'd be surprised at how pervasive it is in everything that we do in real life, right? Open up any app that you have, right? It can be your banking app.
Yep.
There's gamification elements in your banking app, right? Believe it or not, point systems, your bonus link or your Mestra cards, everything. Like so. You'd be surprised at how subconsciously you're being, affected by gamification.
Definitely.
So maybe the audience can just, kind of pay attention today when you listen to this podcast. Just kind of pay attention today at how many different things use those elements.